Hello, so today we are going to be talking about my top 10 favorite series. I like to redo this video every January because I like looking at how my reading taste, how my favorite series shifts and evolves over the years, because while there are certain series that will stay staples in my personal reading love, there are other series that I would hope would shift and change over time as I continue to discover new stories. However, when I sat down to make this list, I actually thought I might just skip doing it this year. I don't know that anything's changed. And then I went through the list and I realized, oh, we've had a few changes. But before we get into the list, a shout out to today's sponsor, Aura. It is far too often that we get an email letting us know that a company we trusted has had a data breach and now our personal information is just out there. Like the National Public Data Breach. The incident comprised over 2.9 billion records used for background checks, including critical personal information like names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, and social security numbers. They even monitor your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points, like the dark web and public court records, to alert you about potential identity theft. Every adult on the account, up to 5, gets up to $1 million in identity theft insurance to help cover eligible losses and fees. Aura gives you all this and more in one app for one price. Avoid data breaches and brokers by going to aura.com/Murphy or using the link in my description to get 2 weeks for free. This will give you plenty of time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data has been exposed. Thank you to Aura for sponsoring this video, and thank you to you for checking them out. So as always, I am going to start with number 1 and work my way down to 10 because that's just how I prefer ordering things. So the video is going to start, I know it'll surprise you, my number 1 favorite series of all time is still The Lies of Locke Lamora. There are 3 books. There will be a 4th someday, but it's supposed to be 7 books long. And yet, after book 1, it was already on my top list. After book 2, it was secured as my number 1 top series, and it hasn't budged since then. Book 3 is also good. I have multiple reviews for each of these books, some solo, some with friends, and honestly, I mean, I don't know, I could keep reviewing them. I might. I don't really get tired of talking about the series, and I've read through each of these books. I've read through the first 2 at least. I think I've read through book 1 5 times maybe, book 2 probably 4 times, or 3, and then book 3 I've only read twice, but I will continue to reread these books. They don't get old for me. Anyway, this is following Locke Lamora and his best friend Jean, who are orphan boys that are being raised up to be thieves, swindlers, ne'er-do-wells. They make their fortune by their cunning and their acting and their sleight of hand. Unfortunately, Locke has a penchant for the theatrical, and so he does tend to get himself and his friends into a lot of trouble because no job is too big, and a lot of the pain they go through is directly because of that. I love this series for how clever it is, for how witty it is, for how funny it is. The fact that I'm constantly on my toes, I'm constantly trying to keep up with their plans because the way it's written, I know enough to follow along, but then also every character is several steps ahead of me, and so like I'm constantly surprised at what the characters are doing and how far ahead they've thought things through and who is actually on top given any moment, but also because of the found family, because of the friendships. I love these characters more than I could tell you. My number 2 is a new series. My number 2 spot is one that wasn't in last year's list. I guess I didn't realize when I was making the list that this one's new. So again, the bind up that I have of them, I've lent out to a friend, so I only have book 1 on me at this point, but Annihilation, or rather the Southern Reach trilogy, is now my number 2 favorite series. I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? So book 1 follows the 12th expedition into Area X. Area X is it's a place where there was once civilization, but now it's completely taken over by invasive plant life. But the problem is that this invasive plant life seems to be sentient, maybe? A tower or tunnel appeared in this area, and everyone that goes into it tries to understand the mystery of where this place came from, how it's affecting people, what in the world is going on, but none of them are able to. They either lose their minds after they go into Area X, or they all kill each other. One expedition, every character came back with cancer. It affects every expedition differently, but it affects them very, very strongly. So our cast are all unnamed, and we follow the biologist. That's the role that she holds in this expedition, and we actually go into Area X with her and experience what she's experiencing with her, and it is some cosmic stuff. It is cosmic sci-fi, cosmic horror, and it's that feeling of the unexplainable. It's that feeling of something is happening. Something is bigger than us, something is in greater control than us, and we're outmatched. And I've described that feeling several times because that very claustrophobic, like, oh no, of sci-fi / horror, specifically sci-fi horror, is my favorite. And there's gonna be a couple on this list with that feeling, but this was the one that made me realize I love some highly specific things, and from there I've discovered it's just like opened a whole new world for me, but this is still my favorite. Anyway, all 4 books are very, very different. We're exploring Area X from very different angles, and I love them all differently, but number 1 is still my number 1. Next up, you know what? I'm gonna change it. So next up is going to be The Lord of the Rings. I think since I've started my channel, The Lord of the Rings has been on my top of that year list. But I'm pretty sure, at least for the last like 4 years, it has creeped up higher and higher on the list. I reread The Lord of the Rings almost every year, and I just started my reread for this year, and every time I re-enter this world, I just love it even more than the last. Next up is going to be the Age of Madness trilogy. A Little Hatred, The Trouble with Peace, and A Wisdom of Crowds. The Wisdom of Crowds, right? Yeah. I have a dedicated video for each of these books, so if you love this series, you can hang out with me in those videos. This series is the best of Abercrombie's work, in my opinion. This is the next generation story. The First Law trilogy being his first. I've also read his YA trilogy, and I've read all of his standalones. I'm pretty sure I've read his entire catalog, except for there's a short story collection that I haven't read, and I haven't read The Devils, even though all my friends are reading the Ark. Not that I requested one, but I'm still bitter, you know? Oh, whoopsie, this is the first series. These are the standalones. I don't know what I'm pointing to half the time. Anyway, most of the time when an author comes back and says, okay, here's a sequel series, I have a sequel series, or next generation, we're gonna follow the kids of all your favorite people, but don't worry, your favorite people will still be around. Like, to me, that's just so cheap, and I almost never like it. I try it often, but I almost never like it. And this exceeded the last. Not only is it classic Abercrombie in this world that I already love so much, but in this next generation, we see how the world has progressed over time. We see how the events of the standalones have affected things. We see the next generation who are characters just as well built as the first, and the old cast that we already know and love play their roles but don't steal the spotlight, but they are there just the right amount. I love everything about that series, I think. Next up, coming in it, I think I'm at number 5, is the Dandelion Dynasty. Whoops, these were out of order on my shelf. I read these last year, and I think that they topped my list last year of favorite reads, or at least for sure, whoops, right there, Wall of Storms did. I talked about this series in my last video where I was giving recommendations, but the quick pitch for this is that we're following a kingdom that was conquered, and, well, a series of islands that were conquered, all put under one banner, and we're now watching a revolution happen after that emperor died, watching them try to get their agency back, their independence back, as well as restore their culture, as well as the fallout of the moves that have been made and trying to move forward. But we're following a family, and well, we're following a lot of characters and how all of this affects each of them individually. Each book is, the first book is structured differently than the rest of the series is. This book is just unbelievably good. They're all really, really good though. I gave every book 5 stars, I think, or 4.5 is maybe as low as I dipped, probably for The Veiled Throne. It's a really hard series to give a quick synopsis for, but this is a series that I can say wholeheartedly that it is worth every page. At least in my opinion. Speeding things up now that we're at the second half of the list, next up is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This would be higher if the rest of the series, well, actually, I personally think, oh, book 2 is gone. I personally think book 2 does it's a worthy sequel to book 1, but then it kind of falls off. This would be higher if it were just the first 2 books, even if it were just a trilogy, even if it were just the 3. But anyway, this is chaos incarnate. Arthur Dent, a normal human, is trying to not get his house bulldozed to create a highway, and then he ends up, his best friend, who happens to be an alien, ends up taking him away into outer space on his spaceship because the whole world is about to be bulldozed to make room for an intergalactic highway. So if that pitch sounds ridiculous, that's because the book is ridiculous, and actually I made the pitch sound pretty mild for what's going on in the very beginning. I think I've read this book 3 or 4 times now, and I feel like I'm due for a reread, honestly. I do have a live stream, an Opposites Attract. This was one of the books that I made Amber Elise read, and it is her least favorite book that I've ever made her read. So if you want a conversation between a fangirl and a hater, that is a great conversation, but I adore this book so much, and I'll be surprised if it ever gets knocked off of my favorites list. Next up is a new edition, Dresden. I didn't expect this to ever make my top series list, but here we are. Starts off as a very simple story about a wizard detective. A supernatural crime happens. He comes in and investigates. Most people don't know that he's a wizard, but his closest colleagues do. Very episodic, very noir, really not my thing, but still the characters were so good that I decided to give it a couple of books because people hype the series so hard, and I'm so glad. This is one of the rare occasions that people say the series gets good after book X, and it's actually worth that. I would say give it to 3 books, but then you also have to get past book 4, which is also not very good, and then 5 on. Smooth sailing, from what I remember. There might be another dud in there somewhere. The quality is up and down in the beginning of the series, but even the bad books, like they're still so short and still plenty to enjoy about them for the most part, and then the latter half of the series has just been so good to me. I still have 2 books left to read, so maybe I'll take that back, but where I am with my reading, Dresden has just expanded. The world has gotten bigger, the conflicts have gotten bigger, it's not episodic anymore. Now it's so cohesive, and there's so much emotion tied into everything. I loved these characters from the start, but as the series goes on, I love them more and more, to the point that these are some of my favorite characters. Some of the characters in this story are some of my favorite characters in literature. The series is flawed, but there's so much happening in this series that I love so much. Next up is Remembrance of Earth's Past. It might be recency bias that has Dresden above this series. Maybe next year I'll swap their spots. But this is another one of those cosmic horror type stories. So again, just mentioned this in my last video. Oh, I mentioned this one in 2 videos ago. This one in my last video. This book starts off on Earth during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and the social setting does play a pretty big factor in the whole first half of the first novel. But then this is a first contact novel. A character reaches out into space. She shouldn't have done so, and now our location has been found, and now we're preparing for some sort of alien contact. Could be great, could be terrible. Then we get book 2. And I won't spoil anything. I will just say that this series goes into some existential stuff. I'm not gonna cut that. One of the greatest scenes I've ever read comes from this book, and it was whew. And this is also one of the most expansive books or series I've ever read. How far it goes, how much it asks of the reader, but it's incredible. Next up, we'll go with Mistborn. I'll keep this one quick because everybody knows about Mistborn. A young girl with a whole lot of trauma who works with a crew to attempt to make a huge difference in this wasteland of a world. Very hard magic focused, very world focused, excellent characters. This is the series that got me into fantasy. I've read it twice. I haven't read it recently, but it still just rings in my mind. Finally, the only series on my list that isn't fantasy or sci-fi, but in the standalone video, which is coming next, there will be more outside of those genres. It's just that a lot of literary fiction and I'm hungry, horror and other genres don't they don't do series as much. They're more standalones. Beartown is the next book on the list. It would be higher if the final book, The Winners, was more of a win for me, but I had pretty mixed feelings about The Winners. But Beartown is a series following a small hockey town called Beartown in Sweden. This small town is focused around the sport of hockey. They live and breathe this competition, this sport, the players. In fact, the players are kind of idolized. And when something terrible happens in the story, some people call it a spoiler, but I'm going to tell you up front so that you know what the main focus of this book is going to be around. When one of the hockey players rape a character, we see how the town responds. We see a lot of perspectives, and the story does ask a lot of you in the beginning, giving you all these different POVs and all this setup, but once you kind of have your head wrapped around everything at about the halfway point, I feel that it's very smooth sailing and you're able to move with Bachman with the story that he's trying to tell. And it shows all kinds of responses, negative ones, ones of support, ones of denial or rejection or blaming. And Bachman chooses to explore this topic by exposing the different reactions that people have and the cause that those reactions and the effects that those reactions cause. He digs deep into the minds of these characters and in all of the fallout and ramifications. It's not an easy story to read, but it is incredibly written and so worth the read. Book 2 follows the characters, you know, as they progress on, and then book 3, the whole series, we're in the whole town. Book 3 was just really long for what it gave us, and I didn't find everything satisfying, but I do still love the series, and I think book 1 can be read as a standalone. Okay, that's my updated list for my favorite series as of 2025, as of the beginning of 2025, so, you know, from the end of 2024 back, this is it. These are my top 10. Please do chat with me if you've read any of these series, if you plan on picking them up. I would love to continue discussing in the comments. I'll see you again soon. Bye.